Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky held a virtual meeting with negotiators from the Trump administration to discuss the 20-point framework for ending the Russia-Ukraine war. Also discussed were the issues of post-war reconstruction and economic recovery, the latter of which was the focus of today's conversation, according to Zelensky. Today's meeting was held as Ukraine works to finalize its 20-point plan framework for peace, which President Zelensky has said would be submitted to the U.S. in the near future. Joining me now to discuss this, Peter Doran. He is Adjunct Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and former president of the Center for European Policy Analysis. Peter, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
So what can you tell us? What do you make of today's virtual meeting between the U.S. and Ukraine?
Well, Tony, peace has no alternative. That was the message that President Zelensky delivered as he finalized this response to the response, we could say. This new plan, although the full details have not been revealed, the new plan almost certainly builds on what was presented to the Russians previously, and it almost certainly features added security guarantees for the Ukrainians. We don't want to repeat a cycle where a few years from now, let's imagine President Trump is no longer president and Vladimir Putin reinvades. Security guarantees would prevent that, and that's what Zelensky is trying to make sure is in the final agreement.
Is that reflective or a part of what President Trump described today as, quote, pretty strong words with European leaders? Was it about their responsibility to provide security for the continent?
I would suppose, yes. And that's an important component that we really need to underscore here. The Europeans themselves call this a concept, the coalition of the willing. It means the United States is willing to provide Europeans with arms, but it's going to be the Europeans who will have their own soldiers on the ground in Ukraine to help bolster Ukraine as what's being called a steel porcupine. That's a creature no one would want to wrestle with European support. It's important also here to remember that Vladimir Putin has rejected every single offer President Trump has put down on the table, while President Zelensky has accepted every offer. Putin's idea of peace is to pretend that Ukraine has already lost this war, but that's not the fact on the ground.
I mean, that is a perfect analysis. I think when you look at Zelensky, every time has kind of accepted it. He hasn't always been happy about it, but he has accepted it. Putin, even things that are favorable to him, he rejects outright as not being enough. But it looks like, and I'm not a big fan, quite frankly, of President Zelensky. I don't think he's endeared himself to a lot of people. But he does seem to be getting the short end of the stick most of the time.
And that could be what has changed. So the big question was whether or not Ukraine would have to give up territory that it currently controls. This is territory that the Russians demand. The Ukrainians have been sacrificing their own sons and daughters to defend it. And to give that up without a shot being fired, it would be very difficult for Ukrainians to accept. It does look like President Zelensky has hammered out some kind of an agreement where Ukraine wouldn't have to do that. And what we're waiting to see now if Vladimir Putin will accept it. Again, though, if this cycle seems familiar, it's because we've already been here. Vladimir Putin, I believe, will not stop fighting, will not stop attacking unless he is forced to stop. Essentially meaning he runs out of the money he needs to fund this war, Tony.
And we talked about that, Peter, last time you were on the program. That's being fueled by the oil revenue that Russia is getting from India, China, and even European countries.
And this is, I think, where the U.S. Senate can play an important role. So Senator Lindsey Graham and Democrats have all agreed to co-sponsor a very important bill that would give President Trump more authority to apply sanctions on those countries and companies that are helping to fund this war in Ukraine. That's needed. This bill has 84 co-sponsors, Tony. It's almost impossible to get 84 senators to agree on anything, but this is something they they all have put their names to. It has yet to pass, but these are the kinds of things that President Trump will need to see from the Senate to understand the American public wants to see an end to this war, but on terms that are just, fair, and enduring for Ukrainians.
Right, and not requiring American military involvement. That's not the path to peace, I think, that the Americans want. Peter, we just have a little over a minute and a half left. What is the latest on the ground there in terms of the war between Russia and Ukraine? It doesn't sound like Russia is backing off at all during this time of negotiations.
Well, that's an important insight you just made here, Tony, because the latest intelligence assessments that have been passed around between the Europeans and the United States consider that Ukraine is not out of this fight by a long shot. Russia wants everyone to believe the war is lost for Ukraine. It's only a matter of time. But when you actually look at conditions on the ground, the opposite is true. The Ukrainians are staying in this fight. They are sacrificing a lot to do so. But I think it's a big mistake for those in the West to throw up their arms and say, look, the Ukrainians can't win this fight anyway. That's not true, and that's not what the assessments are saying. We should take hope in that.
Peter Doran, always great to see you. I appreciate your assessments. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas.